When former Judge Roy Moore bounded onto stage Tuesday night to declare victory in the Alabama Republican primary, he was quick to offer his own explanation for his resounding 9-point win. "There's one you don't see up here, on stage, and let me just tell you, he's done more for my campaign than anybody, and that's Almighty God," Moore said to a raucous crowd. He then quoted a passage from Isaiah 40 before declaring, "We have to return the knowledge of God and the Constitution of the United States to the United States Congress." Moore's fusion of faith and politics doesn't fit neatly into any of the well-worn political narratives used by pundits to characterize his path to the Senate. Some framed his primary win as a blow to Donald Trump, who endorsed Moore's opponent Luther Strange, and a cheeky win for former senior White House advisor Steve Bannon, who backed Moore. Others read it as a sign the GOP establishment that rushed to defend Strange is drowning beneath an unrelenting tide of raw populism exemplified by Moore. Ultimately, more polling and study is needed to determine exactly where Moore's support came from. But his faith-fueled speech may offer a telling signal about his ability to inspire conservative voters. Moore's candidacy points to something political analysts should keep an eye on: Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism, broadly defined, is hardly new. But sociologists and analysts have seen a peculiar resurgence of Christian nationalist sentiment in conservative American politics, beginning when a bevy of right-wing evangelical Christians began coalescing power during the tenure of President George W. Bush. A decade or so later, voters are now readily backing politicians who say the United States is a Christian nation, attaching the idea, often in ways unmoored from any specific denominational system, to Islamophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment, among other ideologies. Trump made ample use of Christian nationalism in his climb to power, and is beloved by many overt Christian nationalists, and continues to wield it while in office. He invoked it during his many attempts to convince voters to back Strange, telling a crowd in Huntsville that, "Luther Strange knows the true source of America's strength, it's God, its family and its country. You have to understand it was the duty of the government under the First Amendment, to foster religion and foster Christianity. But it's not easy to out-Christian nationalist Moore, who helped birth the modern movement by rooting it in the religiously fertile ground that is church-going Alabama. It was Moore, then Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, an elected position he won as an outsider, who made national headlines in the early 2000s for refusing remove a monument of the Ten Commandments he erected in the central rotunda of the state judicial building. Moore already had a long career, and string of controversies, revolving around his insistence on displaying the biblical laws, but the monument controversy hit a fevered pitch, resulting in thousands of protesters and various leaders of the religious right descending on the Alabama state capitol to defend him. Moore's activism ultimately cost him his job. He was removed from his position as Chief Justice in November 2003 by the State Court of the Judiciary. But he returned to the bench in 2013, remaining until he resigned to run for Senate. Naturally, he doubled down on his tried-and-true devotion to Christian nationalism. 2 tablets emblazoned with the Ten Commandments sat outside his victory party last night, and he still insisted on a melding of Christianity and politics during his campaign. "You have to understand it was the duty of the government under the First Amendment, to foster religion and foster Christianity," Moore told Vox's Jeff Stein earlier this year. This helps explain Moore's historic popularity in Alabama, where every single public poll showed him beating Strange ahead of Election Day. But he also trumpets more recent and widespread aspects of modern Christian nationalism. He insists on putting God back into schools, telling a group of pastors this year that removing prayer from public education has resulted in shootings and killings. He is brazenly Islamophobic, making blatantly false claims that some U.S. cities are under Sharia law and writing in 2006 that Representative Keith Ellison should not be sworn in as a member of Congress because he is Muslim, saying, "Islamic law is simply incompatible with our law." He dismisses most traditional understandings of the separation of church and state, which he insists is a Christian concept, saying government should only stop short of forcing people to worship one way. And more echoes the hardline stance on immigration common among Christian nationalists. In addition to opposing immigration reform efforts such as the DREAM Act, he has argued for using military force to stop immigration at the border. Judge Moore not